Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. The legacy of Frankenstein is one of the most influential in the history of horror. Released by Universal Pictures in 1931 and directed by James Whale, the film helped define what audiences now recognize as the classic Hollywood monster movie. Drawing from Mary Shelley's novel and filtered through several stage productions, the film transformed into a powerful visual and emotional experience that changed cinema forever. Perhaps the most enduring contribution of the film is Jack Pierce's iconic design of the monster, as portrayed by Boris Karloff. With its flat head, neck bolts, heavy eyelids, and clumsy, ungainly, childlike physicality, Karloff's portrayal became the definitive image of Frankenstein's creature in popular culture. Although Shelley's novel describes the creature differently, Whale's cinematic interpretation became so recognizable that it influenced countless films, television shows, cartoons, and Halloween imagery throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. The film also established many visual conventions for horror filmmaking. Whale's use of German expressionist-inspired lighting, dramatic shadows, and Gothic laboratory sets created an atmosphere of dread and wonder. The famous laboratory sequence, where Dr. Frankenstein brings the creature to life, emerged as one of the most celebrated scenes in cinema history and helped popularize the mad scientist trope. Beyond aesthetics, Frankenstein and its dark twin Dracula, released earlier that year, contributed to the rise of Universal's classic monsters, paving the way for films like The Mummy, The Invisible Man, The Wolfman, and sequels such as Bride, Son, and Ghost of Frankenstein. These latter films collectively becoming one of the earliest recognizable horror franchises in Hollywood. Ultimately, it is the film's emotional depth, Karloff's sympathetic, evocative performance connected with moviegoers worldwide, as do the eternal themes of loneliness, rejection, and humanity. Whale's nimble blend of horror and tragedy ensures that Frankenstein will endure, not only as a landmark horror film, but as a culturally significant work that continues to influence filmmakers, scholars, and audiences today. Franks for the memories. We're going to be chatting about 95 years of Frankenstein, and we have an incredible panel to chat about it with me. Let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Anna Sergioli.
Podcast. Good.
Bobby Zier of Lugosi Theater.
Hi, it's Igor.
John Kitley of Kitley's Crypt.
Hello.
Aaron Abishan of Discover the Horror.
Howdy.
And rounding out our round table, Michael Weber.
Hey, it's good to be back.
And we're going to be chatting about a slew of Frankenstein, starting with 1931's The Original Frankenstein, followed by Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, and The Ghost of Frankenstein. We'll be talking spoilers for this amazing legacy, so please prepare yourselves. Thanks for coming on the show, and welcome. Bobby and Michael, you've been frequent flyers for our classic Universal monsters. And Aaron and John, your love of Frankenstein is well known to me. Anna, how did you come to this panel? I did not know that you loved Frankenstein.
This shouldn't be a surprise to you because I keep bringing up Bride of Frankenstein in almost every episode I've done. I certainly talked about it a good amount on our Reanimator and Bride of Reanimator episode. So I'm a huge James Whale fan. And I'm a huge fan of any horror movie that's doing camp. And I think especially Bride does that, but I think a few of these films really get into that. But I'm a big fan of all the Frankenstein movies. Really excited to talk about them today.
Awesome. Bobby, what is it about Frankenstein that resonates for you and makes it such an enduring creature?
I was 7 years old. I rented it from the video store. And when Edward Van Sloan came out and said, Mr. Carl Laemmle feels it'd be a little unkind to present this picture without a friendly word of warning. In my 7-year-old mind, I had seen a couple of Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I knew that even rated R movies did not have a warning in front. I thought, oh my God, this is going to be even scarier than rated R. The character just always resonates because the world is new to him. It's he's a misunderstood creature, and I think it's easy for especially for people of all ages to identify with.
John, you even included a chapter in your book about Frankenstein. Tell our viewers, what is it about Frankenstein that resonates for you?
For me, I always love the science aspect of it, but it really comes down to, like Bobby said, it's the outsider. And if you're a kid growing up loving horror movies, you're an outsider. So you have that immediate connection of not being normal per se, according to society. And especially with the t-shirts and the tattoos now and everything, you definitely fit the mold even more so. But I've always been fascinated with the tragic figure that he's done nothing wrong, but he's accused of being a monster because of what he looks like. And that just resonated with me from the get-go, and it still does today.
Aaron, how about you? This is one of your formative movies.
Yeah, I mean, I always say when I was 4 or 5 or whatever, I sort of randomly wandered in. I tell the story a lot. My family always used to sit outside at my grandparents' house and, sit out, talk. And it was hot summer night. So I wandered in to where the air conditioning was in the house and the TV was on and Frankenstein was playing, and my life changed in that moment. I wouldn't be here. I mean, I don't think that horror would mean what it means to me if it weren't for Frankenstein. And I saw something there that I think impacted me viscerally, but I also think it impacted me philosophically, because I kept coming back over and over and over again. And I think for me, it's generally the existential questions that the Frankenstein monster and his creator pose. It's the idea of being put into a situation that you don't control, that you had no say-so over, but being able to ask the creator why, or at least try to find language to do so. And for me, that has been a profoundly sort of shaping experience, so much so that I have a great big tattoo all over me of Frankenstein monsters. And so for me, it's about the creator, the creator, the creation, and the laboratory, because I think that speaks to everybody's situation. And so I keep returning to them over and over again. And I swear to God, I am delighted in most of them every time I return.
And Michael,
I think Bobby set me thinking, and Aaron is getting close to, I think, where what strikes me about it, and it is in the Edward Van Sloan prologue, and it's a man who hasn't reckoned with God, or however the quote goes, but it's the blasphemy of it, and it's the 1930s concern of blasphemy, that we're going to make a film about somebody who did something that a human being should never have gone near, and what happened as a result. And I think that the seriousness, the import of that component of it is what just strikes me as going, you're really going to go there with a scenario that is going to explore something people think about in the back of their heads. What's the worst possible thing I could do? And is there anything worse than bringing a person back to life against their will?
And if we talk about the significance of this film, the idea that we are creating something that did not exist before, in that there were no universal monsters. Even Dracula, it was seismic, the success of Dracula, and it paved the way for Frankenstein. But Frankenstein's really the first monster movie, and the double punch of Dracula and Frankenstein in the same year, they created something new. Talking about like the legacy of Frankenstein, we have to think about like what it is about this monster that changed things forever.
Well, I think it's the performance. It's Karloff. Everything that Karloff is doing. I mean, you could certainly perhaps, compare it to what was going on with The Man That Laughs or a bit of Caligari, a little bit of that. But his performance is so unexpected in its humanity. He did so much more than was probably required of him, or they expected that they wanted to do, given that they decided to adapt the play for film as they did with Dracula, as opposed to really going back to the novel. So I'm sure that original play, there was not nearly as nuanced in its characterization. And for any of us who've seen the behind the show, dialogue about Floy and all, and the eccentricities of that actor's interpretation, the fact that Karloff was at the right moment in that actor's career, he had been waiting for it, and then he got it. And he was old enough to appreciate the gift, and he went for broke in terms of his performance. That's what it is.
Aaron or John?
I don't know what it is, honestly, because I think for me, it's almost like it's seasonal, in as much as I see in the monster different things that seem like the standout piece of the monster all the time. And certainly, Michael, I agree with you. The performance that Karloff gives is iconic. But I also think, Aaron, as you were saying, something was beginning to happen in our culture in the 1930s. Horror didn't exist as a concept, right? There were Gothics, but there wasn't horror exactly. And these two films bring something together. So I feel like in some ways it was just the right moment for our culture to meet this perfect monster, which is perfectly performed and perfectly realized. Well, it's funny, not perfectly realized. It's so funny when you watch the first Frankenstein film and you see some of the decisions that get made, and you're like, boy, that's a decision. I mean, I teach in film school, and I would never let my students get away with some of the edits that they pull off in the first Frankenstein movie. And no soundtrack, come on, it's a mistake. But and yet everything is perfect. There's not a thing about the film that I don't think is absolutely perfect to do what it does specifically. If you're like me, you've got a library of books about this, and thousands of pages have been written about the Frankenstein monster. And I feel like we could kick this can around until we all were old and dead, and we still wouldn't arrive at a satisfying answer,
Just how you mentioned how the no soundtrack, that really struck me this time watching. It's because we had just done the Dracula show about a month ago, and how that also had no soundtrack, and that was so quiet and like a tomb. Whereas this, when you heard, I'm thinking of like the Ed Wood movie when Marta Landau says, it's all grunting, but that all those sounds that he was making, oh my gosh, they were so powerful. The anger, but also when he's afraid, and just hearing those sounds just without any music interruption. I think it was like frightening when it wanted to be, and then when you heard him being scared, it was like heart-wrenching.
I think even though it is, we've mentioned that it's slightly far away from the novel, it is the stage play, but I think they left enough of the essence in there, and I think this is one of the things that shows the real beauty of this. It's subtle, because when I first saw it, and I honestly have no idea, probably early teens, maybe before that, subconsciously, I don't remember when I saw it. And I came from a home where my parents were divorced. So the whole aspect of the father creating something and then rejecting, I didn't get that when I was a kid, not consciously. Mm-hmm. But you connect with that because even though you're not thinking of it, it resonates with you. So I think that really is a powerful thing. And I think that's something that 95 years later, it's still in the film. It's not one of these where you watch it now and you go, oh my God, that's so campy. That's this. And, it doesn't hold still. It still does. And I think a good part of that is because of Karloff's performance.
Anna, you said you like Bride, but I mean, of course, we wouldn't have Bride without this one. What is it that attracts you about this one?
My initial interest in Frankenstein was always that this is the first real horror IP that was created by a woman, Mary Shelley. So I've got to love that. John, to your point, I mean, in her personal life and in the novel, the theme of being a child that eventually is abandoned by a parent is something so pervasive in the book that I do think translates to the film, even without going into the same details, just innately in the story. And I think that's something that makes it timeless. And two other things that I think make this story so timeless. Every time we have any kind of scientific advancement as a society, we're going to have questions about if we went too far. I mean, even with AI right now, is it becoming sentient? We're already having these. Did we create something we shouldn't have? What is our responsibility now? Do we want to be a god, or do we really? Are we not supposed to do that? That's universal, and it's 95 years later, technology is still going to develop in a way we have these conversations. One of my favorite horror movie writers, Robin Wood, he points out that a lot of what you see in Frankenstein is a representation of different class struggles. And I mean, you have, the Burgermeister and the very wealthy Frankenstein families, but then he could have dressed his monster in any way possible. But in the 1930s, these are laborers' clothes that the monster is wearing. That was a choice. And he thinks that just the way that Karloff portrays the monster, and he's threatening, but he's pleading at the same time. And just the combination of his performance and his appearance and the way society is treating him, you can read into the monster any kind of working class or struggling person, and any kind of discarded person or group of people can be read into that performance. And so these are the things that I think make it, we're going to talk about Frankenstein for years and years and years to come.
The monster is such a rich tabula rasa that we can project all sorts of things onto it and get things out, which is what I love about horror, is that we can really examine these issues in a way that maybe we can't with a straight ahead drama that feels more quote unquote realistic. The performances are absolutely key to the success of this film. Also, James Whale's direction. I would like to kind of talk about those two in tandem because Whale comes with such a vision. It doesn't look like any other film we've seen before, and yet it looks like films we've seen before. It's just kind of wonderful alchemy, especially as we come into the sound era.
Not to jump the gun, but the real expressionistic one, I feel like it's like they distill it down and we get it much more explicitly in Sun.
Yep.
But certainly this one has that. And expressionism, right, is just the idea, an artistic movement that places the value of emotion over the value of realism. And so I think that that's part of what you get with the makeup, with the sets, the verticality of that laboratory. It's such an impressive thing to me whenever I see the lab. Like I said, the tattoo that I've got, the lab is equally important to me as the monster and the creator. So Whale and the entire team that designed the film made this place that feels almost otherworldly. Not almost, it feels completely otherworldly with the electricity bouncing around. And the casting also, so we talked about Karloff, but the casting of Colin Clive, I think, is integral to the first film and its successes, because there's this jittery, maniacal quality that Clive brings that I don't know that anybody else could have sustained the way that he did. And so it's one of those weird, perfect moments, because like Anna, you say you're a fan of Whale, and there's not a lot else in his filmography that feels quite like this, that I've seen anyway. You know, he feels like he does like to be campy and tongue-in-cheek, and this film is none of those things. Very, very serious portrayal. And, you know, he finds these perfect people. He finds this guy in Colin Clive that doesn't really have a history of playing these kinds of characters. He's more been in sort of wartime melodramas at this point. And then, as we said, Karloff, you know, who's just sort of waiting around to be plucked and become the most iconic figure horror maybe ever produces.
I mean, it has such an amazing look to it. James Whale, he was such an artist in terms of like how he framed the shots. Like when you first see the monster, how it's this like triple close up. You get closer and closer and closer. And the way he uses light. And I think one of the most powerful scenes is when the monster first sees light, and you just see the light hands surrounded by the dark set and the light above. And he's like almost like he's trying to grab it. And even though like this movie, it feels like one of his much more serious films, there are still these like little moments of like comedy too. Like when you see Dwight Fry, who's amazing, is the assistant Fritz. When he goes down the stairs, like he fixes his sock. Or when like during like the wedding scene, there's the four maids are drinking champagne, and the last one, like everyone else just takes a little sip and puts it down, but not the last one. He gobbles that thing up, and it's much more toned down than what he would do later. But you still get those little touches of comedy in there.
When you see the way the set is laid out, and like Aaron mentioned, how tall it is, Dracula was kind of filmed as a stage play. They do not do that here. I mean, you get the feel of how big that laboratory is from the shots looking down or the shots looking up. That's I think a real testament to Whale. There's other shots like when they're both in the windmill looking at each other through the mill. I mean, there's some really, really well done shots that even today you watch that and you're going, okay, that could have not been an easy setup to keep doing that, but it's so effective. Colin Clive, I think, is really good in the role because he has that duality of completely insane driven. He has to get this done, but then he almost has moments of sanity, as opposed to where someone is sane that has moments of insanity. It's almost reverse, where he is so driven, but then every now and then he's like, oh yeah, okay, maybe I should be oh, fuck that, I'm going to go out in here, we're going to do this, I'm going to keep going. So, and I think Colin Clive really does that really well. not that the rest of the cast don't do good, but it's really between Karloff, Colin Clive, Dwight Fry. They're the main guys. Because, I mean, Elizabeth, okay, her friend, boyfriend, whoever that guy is one of the dullest creatures on the planet. I mean, the creature has more personality than that guy. So a lot of the other stuff is done a little for humor, like the some of the villagers and stuff. But again, you get that grand scope of the epicness of that film.
Oh, I wanted to bring up Edward Van Sloan in the cast. Of course, he's most famous for playing Professor Van Helsing in Dracula. And it was like interesting to see him in this, of how, like when they're all trying to control the monster, his hair gets messed up. He's more disheveled in this one. And there was also something I wanted to bring up, because in this adaptation, Dr. Frankenstein is named Henry instead of Victor. My hypothesis, let me know what you guys think. I wonder if that was done to make him seem more sympathetic, because Henry just sounds like friendlier than like Victor.
I think that's from the play.
Well, then Victor is the name of the friend.
Yeah, Victor's the name of the friend. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where Aaron was talking about in terms of Wales' decision making makes me think about and we've talked about this on other films, and we're certainly going to unpack it tonight as the cast begins to change with other actors playing the role. And the idea that before Colin Clive, he was seriously considering Leslie Howard, who also at this time, with some of the roles that he was doing, like Henry Higgins or things like that on film, were in that same zone. But what would this film have been had he cast Leslie Howard? What would this film have been had they cast Lugosi, which they, entertained a little bit? Just how perfect where they ended up, because they weren't the first choices. And yet these were decisions that were made that we could not accept or want anything other than what this is. And yet, as the series developed, we then got to see what other, things would have happened. I think one of the scenes that always strikes me, and again, it's the sort of rawness of this film, is just the tracking shot of the father carrying the body of Maria. And how striking it is, and knowing that little girl was acting, and we hear how she was in pain. It was difficult to do and be bouncing that way, and she complained about it apparently, but she was so into it. And the scene is really jaw-slacking, watching the image of it and watching the reaction of some of those partiers as they begin to recognize it and then follow it and tap each other. And then as the scene moves along, it's just genius. And it's so heartbreaking, because you know exactly what's going on in that man's head. Just the decision he made to leave, and his last word to her, be a good girl, and that he would have wanted to say something more or hug her or whatever. It's things like that continue to surprise with this film, of how basically raw it was willing to be. And again, that's the direction. That's him going, no, I'm going to go there with this.
As you mentioned that rawness, I mean, we have the mob that emerges, right? We will have the mob for the rest of Universal, is we will have this raging mob that goes off to seek justice. We will see that show up time and time again throughout horror history. One other image that strikes me is them out on the heath, because you have somebody spoke about the otherworldly quality. The fact that you have those painted backdrops, and you have the fake rocks, and you have Frankenstein and his creation staring at each other with this painted landscape behind them. That image just is devastating to me. And I remember the first time I actually came across this movie was not in film form, but it was rather in a photo novel. They used to release these big books, and it would just be image after image of the movie. And then there would be like little dialogue bubbles popping up. So I actually read this movie for the first time before seeing it, but some of those images now are so striking to me. I think of all the reference books I've looked at and all the images I've seen there. This is the one that is probably the most images that are just trapped in my brain as still images. Whale does have such an eye for it. John, you talked about the images through the windmill. Those shots, I remember seeing those shots kind of lined up in the photo novel.
The funeral march up the hill at the top of the film. It's just so striking, and the condition of the graveyard that they're about to bury a new body in, but look at the condition of what it is, and that's where they continue to bury their dead. It's just like the choices, you know. Really.
And it goes back to that thing I was saying earlier, where we're just so lucky about the moment that it happened, because 2 or 3 years later they would have been able to shoot outside. The equipment evolved so quickly, but we're lucky enough that we have this entirely constructed reality, including the exteriors. In just a few years, it'd be way cheaper to just go outside and shoot it, but they couldn't do it then. And so we have this self-contained universe, right? That doesn't exist anywhere else except in that one film.
Well, and also that it was done by Universal. I mean, imagine even in 1931, had this been filmed by MGM. And we can see the comparative by looking at Mark of the Vampire to see what an MGM vampire movie looks like and who they cast and the sheen, the unmistakable sheen. This is definitely made by a studio run by Germans. They got this looks
and
like.
Clearly pre-code too. Obviously code comes, like the Hays Code comes into play for Bride so much, and I don't know if we would have ever gotten this or Bride if they came after the Hays Code, because even like so many scenes, like anything that was, the blasphemy is so important to this movie, but that part was heavily censored and there was a desire to censor it more. The most impactful scene in this movie is probably that terrible scene where the monster's just playing with Maria and doesn't understand. He just, until it's too late, that he's actually going to murder her. And it was only recently that footage was fully recovered because that was censored heavily. It's a perverse tale, and Whale makes choices to show the perversion, especially like the work to make these sets. You're in a castle, a medieval giant castle, but you have like the most modern Tesla coil science lab in the middle of it. I mean, that's something perverse about it. This solemn scene at the beginning of a funeral, we're just waiting to dig up the body. It's so perverse, but it's supposed to be. It's Frankenstein.
Well, and to throw the shovelfuls of dirt into the face of death, you know.
Even being on that set with Strickfaden's equipment, anybody that was near that was that close to death, because that stuff was about as far from safe and legal as you can get. I mean, you had a Tesla coil, that's an instant. You're done.
Yeah. Well, they talked about how electricity was so important to this movie, and they're like, how can we realize that visually? Because you can't see electricity, and that's how Strickfaden's equipment came into play, was that they wanted something that sparked and arced and had a lot of visual quality to it. And then of course they add in all the sound that goes with it, and it gives it life. It gives it a real feeling of something that is moving this movie along.
One more.
I had a chance a few years ago to buy a Strickfaden knife switch, screen used from the film, and I just didn't have enough money, and it remains a thing. Like, as I say it, I feel some part of me die.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, when you're talking about Strickfaden too, this would, I mean, aside from Metropolis, which of course they took a lot of imagery from, the play that this was based on did not have that kind of a scene.
Right.
So once again, it's the filmmakers just envisioning from absolute whole cloth the creation of the monster, because it's, just described, we just, get up off the table or whatever.
Yeah. And it's a single line in the Mary Shelley novel, it's like, I gathered the equipment around me, and you're like, okay, but to bring all of that into life.
And it's so visually striking. It makes you believe it's possible too. When you see it all happen, you're like, I buy it. This could make the creature come alive.
And the coming to life scene is not glamorous. It's sort of clumsy. The hand is horrifying as it trembles a bit. It's not voila,
And I know we said this isn't as camp, but it's alive. I mean, pretty camp.
But what you just said is exactly it. But it feels so inevitable because it is so fully soaked our culture, right? That it's alive thing. Like, if you could apropos of nothing say it's alive to people, and 70% of humanity is going to picture that scene.
I was just going to say that just shows the peak of Clive's burst of insanity is he's completed his goal. But real quick, I wanted to go back to the Maria in the film. No, there's no hint of a monster yet, but that mob mentality, immediately someone killed my daughter. She just drowned in the water. Nobody saw anything, but he immediately wants someone to pay for the death of his daughter. And then they bring up the mob mentality and everybody's out to kill somebody. And you're sitting there watching this now going, huh, well, we still haven't really learned anything, have we?
No, agreed. And there are some wonderful leaps that happen here. There was something that popped up to me this most recent viewing. Fritz goes up and cuts down the hanged body. And Frankenstein goes, his neck's broken. It's useless. And I'm like, what did you think when was going to happen? If you're cutting down a hanged guy. I'm like, of course his neck is broken. On the commentary track of the Blu-ray, they talk about how using a bad brain is introduced in this movie. That's not something that's in any other aspect of the story. And for the first time, it becomes less about a father abandoning its son and more about, well, we put a bad brain in. If we'd put a good brain in, it would have been fine.
Yeah.
And that's something that we will never know, at least not in this film. As we move forward, I don't know if we ever get a good brain that gets stuck in any version of the Frankenstein monster. But that was something that struck me, that it's it really is about a bad brain versus a bad father.
It works as a shorthand because this movie, it's a relatively short movie. It has to move along. But the fact that you could think that Dr. Frankenstein, he didn't even bother to check this brain out. He didn't look at it. He's still,
okay, Fritz shows up with the presumably the container the brain is in that says abnormal on it. I'm like, what's going on here?
So even though it's a shorthand, he still doesn't care enough about the experiment. He doesn't even care enough to examine it. And the way Professor Waldman explained it, it seemed like it was fairly obvious, And I even noticed during the scenes, Dr. Frankenstein refers to the monster as it, and even Professor Waldman refers to him as him.
It changes it into melodrama, that it's like a whoops accident that creates this thing. But John brought up something that I hadn't really considered, which is that moment. When is the moment that it turns from being a pliable adult baby to being, quote, a monster? And what are the implications of who is interpreting it that way? And Anna had mentioned earlier about that scene with Maria and the choice of the editing. And we understand now that, again, that the result of choosing to remove that put onto Karloff's performance something that was potentially more horrifying in the imagination of what he did to that child. Right. What the father discovered, as opposed to what really happened was that he didn't murder her. He was playing and it went wrong, So there are ramifications with this film because it was short. It wasn't going to take the time of Del Toro 3 hours to really explore all of this stuff. It needed to cook along and hit the points. That scene with the mob, when the decisions that happen with the Burgermeister, I really watched it and I'm like, the dramaturgy is so bad of how they go from one to here to here to here. Get him, you to the fire, you to the, it's like, oh my God, how did you guys even come to this? She's been murdered. Why? Because she has,
Right.
And the mob doesn't improve in its skills later on in terms of decision making as the movies go on. And something that feels so key to this movie is this was supposed to be a movie where he was a true monster, and that was resisted by Whale and others in creating it. So it almost feels like the abnormal brain was either from a previous draft or just meant to build tension for the audience, like what's going to happen if you have a bad brain.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a criminal brain at work here. It seems like it's a childlike brain. It is a brain that is learning as it goes. So
not the hands of Orlok,
right.
Well, and I think too, kind of what Anna, you were talking about earlier about the code and how I think that one of the important things about this film is not just the film itself, but how the film has evolved in our culture and alongside our culture. And as we all know, but maybe not everybody watching would know, that the film was censored for a while to remove the part where the monster throws Maria into the water, leaving this really interesting sort of Kuleshov effect intact, where everybody sees something far more horrific that the monster did. So there were generations of people for whom the monster might have raped and killed the little girl, because it was never clear until it was restored.
As you alluded, the way that Maria is being carried, just her body looks broken. Like that's the image that I get, is that the monster just destroyed her. And that, we're basically just seeing this broken body being carried, not necessarily that she was drowned, but that she was just like broken. And what he's carrying through the streets is this broken doll. Bobby, you alluded to Fritz pulling his sock up. I've always noticed that Maria has one sock pulled down, one leg that has a stocking, and then the other leg that's pulled down. And that was his decision to make it just that much more kind of disheveled.
That is amazing. James, he knew his details. Little details like that. And also I wanted to add, before the Maria scene, when Fritz is torturing the monster, he's kept 3 days in the dark. Like, one of his primary caregivers is torturing him with the torch and everything. The scenes of the monster looking terrified, and Dwight Fry is just like the whites of his eyes. He's so amazing, because he's able to go from doing like something goofy, like pulling up the sock or getting scared and dropping the brain, to really trying to psychologically scar the monster. And he's terrifying in those moments.
Well, and you notice that Colin Clive can't even bear to step in.
By that time, Clive, or Frankenstein, Henry, is already like, I don't want anything to do with this. And he's realized that he has not done a complete success in his mission, and just kind of wants to wash his hands of it. And which is a shame. And I think that's where almost the abandonment part comes in, where almost not necessarily abandonment, but just like utter disappointment. He obviously something wrong with him. I can't do anything with this. And I think the parts with Fritz, depending on how you want to read this into it, as far as society, because Fritz is probably getting kicked to the curb through his life.
Yeah.
So here's his chance to be the big dog, and I'm going to do exactly what I've hated all my life to somebody else. So it's that transference of abuse, whether that was written in there for that, but man, it sure plays that way today.
Aaron, can we talk about Frederick Kerr?
Please.
This performance, come on, Baron Frankenstein. What film is this man in? His cane on the door and all of that. I mean, he's right up there with Ernest Thesiger in terms of James Whale's stock company. He was in Waterloo Bridge with May Clark, and they're all part of this stock company who must have understood what James Whale, would just probably sit there and giggle at the camera while they were just chewing the scenery.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I think that's what Bobby was talking about, that Whale knew to inject some humor, but these are not the things that we talk about when we talk about this movie. But I think they are kind of integral to its success, is that you have the build and the release, John, you talked about Colin Clive, and that was something, his performance this time around. We always see the hysterical moments in the clip shows, but him talking gravely to Ed Van Sloan, he seems perfectly reasonable, and he's just an intellect who's exploring something. I love getting that version of Colin Clive. We get a little bit of that in Mad Love, where we get to see that kind of just even keel Colin Clive, who's kind of charming and funny, and we just get a glimpse of it here. But it's what makes him such a likable character, is that we see that's Frankenstein as well.
Not to get into the next film too quickly, but you see that continue in Bride, where he's not done with his insane passions. He realizes that it was an insanity, but there's a line in there that he's like, oh yeah, I went too far. Oh man, that was great when I did it though, wasn't it? So I mean, he recognizes it on one hand, but then also longs for it again.
Yeah, when Pretorius comes in and kind of unlocks that for him again, you can see his passion just light up, and he's repressed it. He understands that it was wrong, but that doesn't mean it's not still a passion for him.
Right.
And if he can do it, and maybe do it successfully this time, I think that's the other key to Bride, is that he wants to do it right this time, as opposed to where it went off the rails, and we can blame it on whatever. He wants to be able to see his vision to the end. Favorite moments? Anybody have some images that pop to mind? I'm really glad you brought up the Baron, Michael.
Something that I forgot how much I enjoyed. So the costume design in all these movies is by Vera West. Elizabeth's wedding gown is really a famous example of costuming. That like 8-foot veil behind her, and her just fretting in the room while waiting, and then Frankenstein's monster appearing in the door behind her is a really cool, enjoyable, pretty scene, and great tension. And I like that one a lot. And I also like it because, the framing device of this whole movie to add tension is the wedding. Like, I can't get married yet. I have to hold on, babe. I've got some work to do. I gotta get this out of my system real quick. And then, of course, the climax of the wedding being where the monster appears. So that also adds to why that's such a cool scene, but visually, just so stunning.
The climax when the windmill's on fire, I think, is just spectacular. The expressions on on Boris Karloff's face when he's surrounded by fire, it's horrifying. You were so scared for him. In fact, when Bela Lugosi first saw the movie Frankenstein, that was the scene that really touched him, and he was acting it out for his friends, in tears running down his eyes, because it reminded him of when he saw people on fire in World War I.
There's so many things in here that define what Universal horror films are. The castles, the burning windmill, the sets, like you'd mentioned. As good as everything is in here, anytime Karloff is on screen, all eyes are on him. I mean, he just does with the most subtle nuances or moves. Like we were saying, when he's looking up at the light, it is a slow movement. It's not jerky. It's not, a surprise. He's still learning how to move. But through all that makeup and just seeing his eyes, you can sense there's something human in there. There's a soul in there that's wanting something. And there's moments in it that are just tragic. From, like Bobby said at the end, when he's helpless in that fire, just watching him perform is just stunning. It never ceases to amaze me how good he is.
Well, and you have those heavy lids, those wax eyelids that were Karloff's idea, because he was like, he needs to look like he's asleep. He can't look like he's too awake, too alive. What a great instinct that was on his part. It just becomes so integral to this monster's look. There's something in there, but we have to really look in deep. We have to lean forward. We have to engage in order to encounter it.
We've touched on it. We're talking about Whale and Karloff. You got to talk about Jack Pierce.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, whole cloth. I mean, the choices, the electrodes, the scar. Whale isn't one to have. He does have fancy shots, and then he doesn't. But this has the super self-conscious shot of the first Karloff reveal, the boom, boom, boom of the push in with the camera. And when it's close, that makeup is impeccable.
Yeah.
For 1930, and that it was all built out of a kit. I mean, it is human. You don't see, like you see in the later films, the latex at the corners there. It's just impeccable. For anybody there's the talk of what Lugosi's screen test looked like, potentially like the Golem or something like that. And you can't even imagine this film without that makeup. It's the third player, it's the third leg of this stool that just makes it brilliant.
I was going to refer back to the thing that John talked about, which is when he reaches up to the light. But I also think that the killing of Edward Van Sloan is a moment too where we finally see his power, because the monster becomes almost superhuman later on, but there's no indication before that he's anything much more than a man. They keep him chained up because he doesn't behave properly. But then you find out that he can kind of just hold another grown man easily one-handed, and I think that's a great sequence. And I do think that some of these, I said that it's not a funny movie, but it is in some places. And there's that little exchange at the wedding whenever the monster comes in and gives that little that kind of cute little growl that he gives for no particularly good reason. And I used to hate that because I thought that it really detracted from the moment of the movie. But I think it plays well, and it shows some of Whale's, sense of humor. Like you were saying, Michael, the inclusion of Kerr as the the Baron is like, what is this guy harumphing around about, you know? And one of my favorite scenes is, or favorite things, is when he comes into the laboratory building and he goes, what's this? And because there's a torch on the ground. Can you imagine walking into somebody's house and there's just stray flame on the ground in the front room, and your response is, what is this?
You bring up a really something that always affected me when I watched the scene with him killing Edward Van Sloan, and it goes back to the first time when he attacks him and he gets knocked to the ground, and Colin Clive says, "Are you all right?" Yes, I'm fine, and answer the door. But you go, he's an old man. He has no chance against that monster. When you see the eyelids flitter, he's an old man. And it strikes me, the other time I get that feeling is in Bride, when he kills Mary Gordon at the top, when he kills an old person who just could not at all, Colin Clive can fight a little bit with him and does fight and fights him off, but when he comes after people like that, it is just like, oh God, this is just a slaughter.
And you go, why couldn't it have been Una O'Connor?
I know. Even I agree with that.
The movement of Karloff is not the cliche that we associate with the Frankenstein monster. We don't really get that until Ghost, where we have kind of this stiff movement. Like, he is all angles and movement and violence and physicality. Again, I'm surprised by it each time I go back to visit, because that image of the slow, stiff movements are so ingrained in us.
Honestly, he moves like someone who has just become alive. He's figuring it out. He's walking. This is new to me, or to him,
Yeah.
And I just love about, like, the way he moves is, you really believe that he's just become alive, 3-4 days ago.
Well, and the way he walks, leaning forward on the balls of his feet, like he's almost about to tip over at all times, which is so toddler-like.
Right.
He's figuring it out, as you said.
Michael, you brought up Der Golem. I mean, that's, a decade before this, you had Der Golem with those giant boots and the stiff walking, but there's still a lot of differences. Like in Der Golem, his eyes are always hugely wide open, whereas here, opposite, they're kind of half lidded, and the whole time it's all the acting in his hands. Like, he's always gesturing out and reaching out, also very, very toddler like in the movements.
Well, we're going to drift forward into Brides, but feel free to always look back and bring forward the original. Yes, let us jet forward 4 years to 1935. We did talk about this movie back in October. So folks looking for a deeper dive, please visit that as well. People's thoughts about Bride. It's the first horror sequel, and what a sequel it is. There's the debate as to which is the superior film, Frankenstein versus Bride. I don't think there's necessarily a debate to be had. I just think you can enjoy them both for what they are, or they resonate for different sensibilities. But people's thoughts about Bride. Bobby, go ahead and kick us off there.
Well, I think it's spectacular. Even the opening credits, how in the original Frankenstein, how a monster played by question mark, that air of mystery. And I love in this, Elsa Lanchester, she gets the credit for playing Mary Shelley, but then the monster's mate, question mark. I love that. And it has all these wonderful, larger than life characters. And I know, but I love Una O'Connor. I think she's a ball. Someone's got to, the dialogue is so memorable. Like the quotes, "to a new world of gods and monsters," and the music is so good. The creation scene at the end, they find it's spectacular in the first one, and they find a way to make it different, but just as spectacular, with all these close-ups and shadows and everything. So it's honestly amazing. And you see with James Whale, the artist, now he had a lot of creative input in the first one, but now he has total creative freedom. He didn't really want to make this movie. That was his deal. I could do anything I want. Every shot is just sensational. And I gotta say, one of my favorite parts is when you see the wonderful character Dr. Pretorius, and he's showing off his experiments. And these are these little people in bottles. He has this like little king and a little queen and and a little devil, and that's so cool. Like what a creative, unexpected turn.
I love that that's kind of his calling card too. He like shows him, goes, I made these. What do you think?
Obviously, they couldn't say it when the movie came out, but it is implied that he's gay. And there's this moment where he's talking about normal size, and he says, achieving normal size has been my difficulty. You did achieve size. I'll have to work that out with you. And you could totally take it that way.
John, let's go and bounce now to you. What are your thoughts about Bride?
This one's a tough one for me because half of this film, I think, is some of the best of the Frankenstein legacy. The tragedy, the heart-wrenching scenes. But I know because it's Whale's pet project, he was allowed to use people that he liked, like Una O'Connor, who I am not a fan of. And I understand they put in the more campy humor in here to offset the stuff that Whale wanted to put in there that he thought he was going to get told not to. So it was kind of, we're going to have some weird stuff, so I'm going to put in some kind of silly humor in here to get the audiences off track of what I'm actually really doing. I've never had a problem with the monster speaking. The scenes with the hermit, I think, are some of the most tragic and heart-wrenching scenes in horror film history. And it goes back to what I was saying in the first one, where the creature is an outsider. And here you have this hermit who lives on the outskirts of town. He's an outsider. He's a blind hermit. Nobody cares about him. He's there by himself. And you have these two characters that come together. They just want to have a friend. They just want to have someone that doesn't judge them. And the speech when the hermit's praying and thanking God just for a visitor, and the creature's crying. I mean, that's heart-wrenching. So there's moments in this film that I absolutely adore. And then there's parts that I don't. The little creatures in the jar, I think, is kind of completely distracted from what the film is. I love Pretorius because his sense of humor. I mean, he's down in the tomb drinking, and here comes this creature. Oh, hey, want some wine? Just has no horror. Just doesn't care. And I love that about him.
I love this movie so much. This is one where I remember the first time I saw this, and it was not what I expected it to be at all. First of all, I mean, any horror sequel always has a bit of a question mark next to it in terms of the quality. But as you said, AC, this is the first horror sequel we have. I didn't expect so much of this movie. I didn't expect the camp and the humor and those kinds of things. The stuff that doesn't so much work for me are like, the only good thing I can say about Una O'Connor's performance is that it led to some really fun Cloris Leachman moments in Young Frankenstein. James Whale was openly gay, and so was Ernest the singer, and Clive was also thought to be probably bisexual. I mean, there's a lot of like gay thoughts that go into this film, but the longtime partner of James Whale said really the way that translated to his movies in any way was just the campy quality that a lot of them had. I'm a huge fan of Old Dark House, which, precedes this one. And that was James Whale's pre-code way of doing movies. And then we've got Bride, where now the Hays Code's in place and there's constant interruptions during both production and then post-production to get it to the code. But I still think he gets away with a lot in this movie, even with all those restrictions. John, to your point, I think a lot of the camp and humor is to distract so that he can get away with stuff. But it's Dr. Pretorius I have the most fun with in this movie. Oh, I didn't see you there. I was just drinking wine alone with the skull in the cave. Like, I just love this movie. I have fun. It's just, I have a lot of fun with it.
I think about the first film as being such a collaboration between Whale and Karloff. And then this film, and Anna mentioned it a bit earlier in the first discussion, it's the issue of the talking for me. That in the first film, because Karloff does not talk, we project onto him our thoughts of what he's thinking. And his instinct to say, don't take that away from me because I'm now defined. If I speak, it's what I wanted to say, not what you wanted to put onto me. And I think to John's point, there are pros and cons by the choice, that particular choice, by making him become articulate. It is not really, it's an evolution of the same character, of the character from the first film. It's not entirely the same character anymore, because now he has become articulate in that way. And yet, you know, you wouldn't give up the scene with the hermit for $1 million. And the fact that he is learning, and you see how quickly he can learn, and how quickly with kindness he can advance. But you do miss a little bit of his babiness in the first film, of just being so vulnerable, which he's not. He is decidedly, the ramifications, again, the murder of the man, the drowning of the man at the beginning, and then Mary Gordon tossing her and hitting her so hard on those rocks. I mean, he's a brute in the second film. He's changed. I do like it, but it is a little bit of, you know, it's this exercise of James Whale just going, you know, it's a bit of the Orson Welles, the kid with the biggest train set in the world, you know, and he had all, you know, and Coppola went through it too, and Godfather too, when everybody's like, when you're the magic guy, it all gets a little out of whack. But I love the film, and I love the prologue. I love that they felt that they wanted to put a prologue, and how that worked, and all of the, you know, connective tissue, watching and seeing that it's Una O'Connor as the housekeeper or whatever she is, walking those two Afghan dogs at the very beginning. It's a lot of fun Easter eggs.
Yeah, let me start by saying it's a film I love. It's a Frankenstein film. It's a film I love. For me, it was a really important lesson in developing my own voice and interpretation of films at a really fairly young age. Because I had this book, and I've talked about it on our show. I had this book called The Best, Worst, and Most Unusual Horror Films by Consumer Reports, of no less. But it was my go-to horror guide when I was a little kid. And it is so unequivocal in its diagnosis of Bride of Frankenstein being the infinitely superior film. At the back of the book, it rates every horror film in the book. There's pages and pages and pages. Wow. And there's one film that gets a 10 out of 10, and it's Bride of Frankenstein. And so I watched Bride of Frankenstein, and I'm like, I'm waiting for, so Frankenstein's already a film I've seen numerous times. I don't get to Bride until probably my very early teenage years. Somehow that was one of the last ones I saw. And I kind of had the same reaction I had when I saw The Phantom Menace, where I got to the end of it and I was like, wow, did I hate that kind of, you know? And I don't hate it at all, but I think that it was tonally so different than Frankenstein. And I had an expectation of what it was going to be, that I realized that for me personally, to this day, I say, you know, it's a Frankenstein film. It's better than thousands of other films for me, but it doesn't live particularly high. As far as rewatching Frankenstein films, I'll watch Son, I'll watch Ghost, I'll watch Versus Wolfman. I watch a lot of them before I watch Bride. And that's just because you've all alluded to it. Those of you who've pointed out the softness of it. It's Una O'Connor. It's the little dancing homunculi. It's, you know, all that stuff just strikes me as too sort of funny and too cute for its own good if I'm not in the mood for it. So again, a film I love, but a film that was instrumental in me learning to develop my own critical voice at a pretty young age, because I didn't know if I was allowed to. I didn't know that here's this book that I trusted and believed. Yep. That I was like, wait a minute, I don't agree with this. And so I had to learn that I could still trust and believe in certain parts of it, but I had to develop my own understanding.
This is one of those movies that I will continue to come back to because, like you, I was told that it was kind of the pinnacle of horror. But one thing that does, because I've often said you can't ever watch the same movie twice, you know, the movie changes, or rather we change, you know, the movie stays the same. Something that struck me on this most recent viewing was that we have a monster who wants a companion. You know, he's experienced that with the hermit, and he realizes that's what he needs. He needs something that he can connect with. And so he goes to his creator and says, make me another one. Make one just like me. There's something about the creation of a woman for a man there's something there, and I don't know that it was there in 1935, but there's something about a man showing up and saying, create this thing for me so that I can have what I want and what I need, instead of being an outsider. We empathize with the monster. We want him to be happy. At the same time, we're looking at this bride and going, you're doing it again. You were committing the same wrong again, and you're doing it in a way that now is completely objectifying, literally, this woman that you are going to now give as a gift to curation to appease him. That was just something that struck me. I don't know that that was in anybody's mind, but it's certainly something that resonates for me as somebody who works in empowerment, self-defense, and, you know, agency and boundaries and things like that. It strikes me as really wrong. And the one thing I love is that the monster recognizes that she doesn't want him. She doesn't want me. I can't force myself on her, but I will kill her. I will kill her, and I'll kill Pretorius, and I will let the quote unquote normies leave, but I'm going to murder this person who doesn't love me. There was just something that resonates in a completely different and in a really a deeply horrifying way for me now.
The start of the creation of the bride, if I'm remembering correctly, was Pretorius's way to blackmail Henry into helping him. The monster stumbles along and goes, hey, here's an idea. So I don't know if that was the genesis of the project to be in the beginning, but as we alluded to, or we said in the first one, the creature was never asked to be born, and it wasn't that he was brought back to life; he was given life because he didn't exist before. Right. So now we have another person not only being brought back to life or being created, but now, as you said, Aaron, you're being created for this job, which throws in another stuff. The fact that the creature says that we belong dead, I don't think that it's, I'm being rejected, I'm going to kill you. I think it's the creature realizing we're not of this world. We shouldn't be here.
We don't belong.
That's why he's crying at the end and says we belong dead, because he understands that we shouldn't be part of this world. So I don't think it's more I'm going to, out of vengeance, I'm going to kill them, as much as this is how we should not be alive.
Yeah, and AC, the themes you're talking about, and I'm always really sensitive to things like that in horror movies, and usually grumpy about them. But I mean, we talk about the hermit played by Heggie, and I mean, that's the monster at the happiest that he's ever been. All he wants is a friend, a companion, and by finding a blind person who's not horrified by him, who's also lonely, who also wants a friend. If those two hunters never showed up, I think they would have had a wonderful friendship, and the movie would have ended and been a beautiful film. And John, as you said, just the tragedy of that being taken away. Now, the monster didn't, like, it was Pretorius who has the idea of a bride and stuff, and you can almost read it as like social norms being thrust upon this monster who's still learning the world, where it's like, oh, you want a wife, right? And he's like, oh yeah, that thing that my master kept being obsessed with in the first movie, that wedding, his marriage, that's right, that's what you're supposed to do, have a wife. And like, he only ever says the word friend, just friend, that's all he wants, is a companion, and no one's like him, and he's being promised that somebody like him will be his friend. And I will never forget the first time I saw this movie, and when she sees him and slowly it turns into her screaming, that was so impactful. I was so stunned by that, heartbroken even. Oh my gosh, he didn't know that would happen.
Aaron, you bring up a really good point in the sense that there's the moment where they drug the monster when he shows up in the laboratory and they knock him out. And if at that moment Henry had just said, let's take the opportunity to fix him, to take out the bad brain and get a new brain, and maybe we could get it right, it would have been just a very different. And don't worry about this whole thing with bringing this woman back. Let's just make him better. But I don't know. I'm trying to in one. I'm not. I hope I'm not getting it mixed up with Gene Wilder. I'm trying to remember. Does Henry does realize that it was the brain was the wrong brain?
Yeah.
Tells him.
Everand Sloan points that out to him.
Right.
The brain that disappeared from my lab.
Yes.
The bride kind of looms large over horror, mostly because she's one of the first female monsters, but she doesn't have a lot of screen time here. So I think it's kind of impressive that it's such a striking look, and her scene is so effective that she looms large for the rest of horror history.
It is another one of my issues with the film. Again, from where I came from, expecting when I first saw it to have this iconic, because I'd seen the iconic character, I wanted to see so much more of her, and I see her for 3.5 minutes. It's like Hammer's Curse of the Werewolf. It's like, that's the coolest werewolf I've ever seen. We're going to give you 5 minutes of him at the end of the movie.
I love the design of the bride. So you've got Jack Pierce again with the hair and makeup. Of course, the hair is so iconic, and Nefertiti was the inspiration for that, with like kind of the giant almost headpiece. And then again, you see the Egyptian imagery with the way Vera West did the mummy-like dress she's wearing. So I think it was really clever to use Egyptian imagery, because talk about a culture with some of the most famous kind of death and afterlife kind of ideas. So you're able to express so much without saying a word in just the design choices. And also compared to the monster, who is, as I said, class is such a big thing in all the Frankenstein movies. His design is very labor or proletariat, but by this Egyptian imagery, you actually create like a regal look to her, which, maybe he was out kicking his coverage or something like that. But like it is, you just see there is, even though they're both a created thing, there's this dichotomy. They do juxtapose class-wise a lot just through the visual choices made with the bride. I think it's really interesting, and why it's so iconic.
From the beginning of the first time we see her, that music score with the bing bong bong bong, but when the bells come in, it's just so perfect with the way that Thesiger introduces her, but also how much thought she put into it, as much as Karloff, into the how would I articulate, and the choice of the swan hiss, and the way she kind of rocks back and forth and then just trust falls into Colin Clive's arms. I mean, she makes so much of the 3 minutes that Aaron is pointing out that she gets. And there's such an assumption that she's right up there alongside Claude Rains as the Invisible Man or the Creature from the Black Lagoon, and she was 3 minutes and never seen again and never appeared or referred to. And yet, even more than Gloria Holden, who, when we unpacked the, Dracula's daughter, I mean, what a great performance, but nobody remembers that. This is the one that you immediately go when you say, name a female monster. Bride of Frankenstein, top of the list. What an achievement.
Oh, absolutely. And even though you don't see her to the end, you're building up to her the whole movie. The beginning, you have that prologue where Elsa Lanchester is playing Mary Shelley, so you get like that. You get like a little hint of it, and you get the mystery. Like I said in the credits, the monster's mate, played by question mark, and you also hear that theme music. The music was composed by Franz Waxman, who is one of the great composers of the golden age of Hollywood, and it's that da da da, and you hear it when they're referring to her. So it's this incredible buildup to that moment, and it's so even though it's short, the movie's firing at all cylinders because it's visually incredible. This incredible makeup, this incredible dress, the way Dr. Pretorius they introduce her with Dr. Frankenstein repeating the famous line, but now changing it to "She's alive, the bride of Frankenstein." It's incredible, and yet you also know how much the monster thought this was going to go well. Dr. Pretorius, he he never mentioned that this might go wrong, you know? Like, he had him set up for this is going to just work perfectly. This shock and tragedy, like, no, it's not. And as you said, she put just as much thought into her performance as Boris Karloff did. So it just, even though it's a short amount of screen time, every moment of it is incredible and emotionally heartbreaking.
I mean, there's a lot of iconic imagery in here between the bride and even the creature, and we do see it obviously a different character than the first. But I think that we also see a difference in the two creators. Henry still has that balance of insanity and being sane. Thesiger does not. Pretorius, I don't care. I'm going to do what I want to do. This is what, and to Bobby's point, maybe he didn't think about the outcome. I don't think he cared. We're just going to do this, and look what happens, and blackmails whoever he has to get what he wants to do. And it's almost not like where Henry wanted to go beyond what man should do or could do. He wanted to break those barriers. Pretorius is more like, I wonder what happens if I do this. Oh, look at that. And I think it's a lot more careless attitude towards science, where Henry, I think, had, may twisted or not in the right direction, had a focus. And I think that's the big difference there. But Karloff, I think, even with the talking, still brings out a character that is memorable throughout history. And I mean, again, this movie's a hard one for me because half of it I love and the other half I'm like, it still plays well. And even to Aaron's point, out of all the series, don't know how many times I would go back to this one because of some of the elements that are really heart-wrenching and for me are almost hard to watch because it's so tragic. Other moments in there are great. I mean, when he's in the hut with the blind man, and to Anna's point, we see the best of this creature. He is just having the time of his life. The minute those hunters walk in, the creature immediately goes, looks at him, and snarls. So he immediately goes, okay, I'm done having fun. I have to go back to who I am. And that's even sad.
Yeah, the idea that someone on the outside gets to decide who your friends are.
Yes.
Speaking of future installments, let's go ahead to 1939's Son of Frankenstein. Michael and I talked about that a couple of years ago as a double feature with Young Frankenstein. It's funny because now I can't watch this movie without thinking of all the allusions to Young Frankenstein. But I also think that it is a great addition to the Frankenstein franchise. It is right up there with Frankenstein and Bride in terms of just a quality film. But that's my thoughts. Bobby, what are your thoughts about Son of Frankenstein?
I absolutely love this. So in Bride of Frankenstein, we got Dr. Pretorius. Here we get this wonderful new character, Igor, played by Bela Lugosi,
yes,
who we have on our shirt. We have here in action figure form, and we have here in mask form.
For those who don't know, Bobby's a big Bela Lugosi fan. So
I absolutely love it. And this movie came after a 2-year ban. England had banned horror films, so Hollywood had stopped making them for like 2 years. And Bela Lugosi had almost no work for these 2 years. He had to sell his house and downsize. He had to sell his dogs, which he loved. He had to sell his 2 cars. His wife, Lillian, had a baby during this time. He had to use the money from the Screen Actors Guild Emergency Relief Fund to pay the hospital bill. And Luella Parsons, the newspaper columnist, had written an article saying, Bela Lugosi needs money. Somebody hire him. And Universal saw that article. And when this film went into production, it started because this little theater in Beverly Hills had nothing else to show. So they put on a triple feature of Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Son of Kong, lines around the block. It played for 4 weeks. Universal did a nationwide re-release of the double feature, and that's why they put Son of Frankenstein into production. And they had told the director, Rowland V. Lee, they were only going to pay Bela Lugosi $500 a week, the same he made on Dracula. And they told Rowland V. Lee, film all his scenes in the week and get him off the payroll. And he went over, Rowland V. Lee went to Bela's house, and Bela was just telling him all the ideas he had for Igor. He was so excited for it. And Rowland V. Lee said to his wife, Lillian, "Don't you worry, Lillian. He is going to be on this production from the first day to the last day, and he is going to make just as much money as Boris Karloff." So he went to the Universal front office and said, "No, we are working on a very special character here, and we need time to develop it." And Bela is incredible in this role. This is his, after Dracula, this is regarded as his most famous character. You know, he's very menacing and creepy the way he has. This is the only time in his whole career where he wore fangs. And he has this really creepy look the way he'll pop in, but he also has this like incredible warmth about him and this like glint in his eye. And he's so funny in it. There's this part where Igor has a broken neck, and the son of Dr. Frankenstein's asking like, "Why is your neck broken?" And he's like, "Because I stole bodies, they said." "And they put me here instead of holy place like churchyard. Because I stole bodies, they said." You know, and Bela Lugosi, he loved doing it because he loved being funny. Like, he loved showing off his comedy skills, and he was so proud of his comic timing in this. This is honestly my favorite one because I love Bela Lugosi. This is my favorite one in the franchise because he's just so creepy yet funny and warm in this movie, and the whole movie is great. But for me, this is the Bela Lugosi show.
So I instantly was like, "Oh, I bet Bobby's gonna like this one the best with all your Bela Lugosi stuff," because this movie is the Bela Lugosi show. I mean, the monster is really just like Igor plays the flute thing, and then the monster's doing his bidding. You know, he's really under someone else's control most of the movie, and so it's not we don't get what we had in the first movie where the monster can represent whatever we want. We don't have the second movie where the monster is learning to be a human. He's a very different character in this movie. We talked about German expressionism earlier in the show, and this is the most obvious set of any of the sets in this movie, with like the extremely exaggerated shadows and things. So that's something that always strikes me with this movie, the very expressionist look to it. Bela playing so different than, you know, the Count or White Zombie or his other characters. This is a much gruffer character for him, and it turns out I really like watching him do that. In terms of the Frankenstein story is less interesting to me, but in terms of other things happening, it is a really interesting movie to watch.
Michael.
Well, the other night I was watching one of Basil Rathbone's Sherlock Holmes movies called The Spider Woman, and what showed up in that film but the Karloff scream? And I forgot that, you know, they had pilfered that out of this, and then it shows up, I think, in House of Frankenstein as well. What always strikes me about this film, and I really like it a lot, when we talked about it before, I think a lot of it does have to do with Rowland V. Lee really came with some great ideas and obviously delivering some really memorable performances from Lionel Atwill and Rathbone as well. But I do start watching this one and begin to see the compromises, the whole disappointment of going, what is going on with Karloff's character? Why did they make these decisions? And how unhappy was he making this? Because he's got to be going, what am I doing? I'm just, you know, lugging bodies around. And what happened to my character? You know, and as it begins to unfold in so many compromising ways in the rest of the series, one of the scenes, though, that always strikes me that is so jarring, I think, every time I see it, is that moment when Karloff swings out from behind the tree and grabs that guy off of the cart going by. The look on his face is just like, there's Karloff. There he's back in that moment.
Yeah, Karloff is the Gollum in this movie, really.
You know, it's funny because, Michael, what you say is all very true. There's a lot of things in here that are, especially with what happens with Karloff, how he is, you know, sort of almost officially backgrounded in this film that seems sad. And there's weird things. They do it all through the series, but where they really retcon this series in this film, where they are bringing characters back. You know, we've got the guy that played the Burgermeister shows back up in this film they do this all the time in the film series, but this is one where they really are kind of playing with. They start mixing around the characters. You've seen this face before, but as a different person. Maria's father shows back up, I think, in this one, if I'm not mistaken. But now he's one of the town council members. I might
They renamed the town.
Yeah.
Frankenstein.
Like, why would you name your town Frankenstein? And how did that not come up before?
But I just love it so much. And I think that it's because, to me, it tonally, because mostly of its background and its sets and the way it's designed, it feels to me like the most like the first one. The expressionistic sets, the understanding of volume that goes a different way. So whereas in Frankenstein, the volume goes up and there's this verticality, there's a depth to this film. I always say, the castle in this film is if the cabinet of Dr. Caligari had been built in real life and then made into a place that humans could actually inhabit, that's what this set is, basically. And so there's this darkness that plays around the edges. And I feel like Basil Rathbone's character in this film is the inverted version of Colin Clive's. So he becomes weird and jittery by the end. And that same jittery energy that we saw in Clive at the beginning of the first film is how Rathbone ends the third film. And it goes without saying that the addition of Lugosi creates this sort of moment in horror history where, my favorite film that Karloff and Lugosi are in together is The Black Cat, but this is right up there. It's right up there just because it's so fun to see them both in a sort of monstrous role, because Igor is a monstrous role in a lot of ways.
Kind of like Bride. This one's a tough one for me because visually it is stunning from the aspects you guys mentioned as far as the set design. Lugosi, I think, is literally probably my favorite of his characters of all time. He is so good in this, and it's a shame that didn't start or restart his career at least as a character actor, where some would have gone, wow, he's really good at this, let's give him more work. That didn't happen. Unfortunately, because of Mel Brooks, I have a hard time watching this and not going, yep, I got that. Yep, that's there. And to the point, the last time I watched this, the dialogue between Basil and Lionel Atwill, I mean, it is so fit for parodying is why they did it, because the stuff that Basil Rathbone is going so over the top. Oh, you think I'm creating a monster? Huh? You think that? And you're like, oh my God, that's exactly what they parody. I remember going back and watching a lot of the early James Bond films and going, okay, that's Austin Powers. They stole that there. They stole that there. And it's really apparent in Son of Frankenstein where they took a lot of that stuff from. I don't like personally the fact that the creature is now back in the background and that he's no longer a character that we have seen evolved in the first two films. He is basically, like Anna mentioned, the Golem. It helps that Igor has taken over the role of the monster, if you will. But a lot of it is just, it's almost an hour and 40 minutes long. And it feels at times that it's that long, but again, it's beautiful. But what's with these townspeople? Nothing's going on. And they're like, we have no bread and our children are going to bed hungry. Okay. Maybe plant some wheat or something. I mean, Jesus.
No, let's get Igor instead.
Yeah, exactly. Now, granted, Igor was killing people or having somebody kill him. But it's like why name the town Frankenstein if you're so hating them? Well, let's name it something else.
First, he was killing people. They said. One of the things I absolutely that I was thinking of, it was such a especially the last film, it was such a character arc of him finding a friend. Now he's just kind of got one. And yes, it's Igor and he's manipulative and not really the best person, but he does, in this one, he does have a companion. And I do think the one really heart-wrenching scene for me is when he finds that Igor's dead.
Yeah.
And that is a really sad moment some horror people are cringe when I do this, but a lot of times I just call the monster Frankenstein, and I feel like this movie kind of names him that. Because they do have that joke on the train where the son of Dr. Frankenstein, Wolf, is saying 9 out of 10 people call the monster, and you hear the conductor say Frankenstein, Frankenstein, and then when Igor kind of intimates that the monster and Wolf are brothers, which would make his name Frankenstein.
Well, and I mean, he is the adopted or the created son of Frankenstein. So by definition, his name should be Frankenstein. His surname should be Frankenstein.
And even like the title, how it has that ambiguous, is it about Wolf or is it the monster?
Right.
Just to put a happy ending to the Bela Lugosi story, after he started getting work again, he bought his dogs back.
Oh, good. I think the last 5 minutes of this movie go really off the rails, though, like in a good way. Like the last 5 minutes, really, like you mentioned, Bobby, like him like mourning the death of Igor. Yeah, you really get a lot of Karloff in the last few minutes.
Well, and Karloff does have the one moment with the mirror. It feels like something where he was sitting around the table and went, "Can I have one thing, please?" And they're like, "Okay, we'll give you a scene with the mirror." He makes the most of it that he can. And then again, as others have mentioned, the moment with him discovering Igor dead, the one person that he's been able to actually connect with for an extended amount of time has died, and that sparks the monster in him.
And that mirror scene is a bit of a callback to Bride of Frankenstein in the water when he's soothing his arm and sees his reflection too.
Yeah, he gets more to do with that. Like it's not, we get something that's clearer, but it does, again, it feels like something that Karloff was like, throw me a bone here, guys.
These movies have all had like really good endings as well. We had the burning windmill, the explosion at the lab. So I like, it's hard to think of how to keep going with it. I like the sulfur pit. Like it's like creepy how it's bubbly and everything, and when you see the monster dying in it. So I feel like for the third entry, they've been like really good at like coming up with good endings.
Agreed. We'll use that to segue into our final film, Ghost of Frankenstein, because he doesn't die. You can't kill him. You can't kill this monster. I texted John the other night and I said I'd forgotten what a mess Ghost of Frankenstein was. And he's like, "What are you talking about? This is one of my favorites." And I was like, "Okay, good. This should be a fun discussion." How come this sulfur pit that's been around for, 8,000 years suddenly just decides it's going to solidify into rock? I didn't realize if you had one dead body to it, that's all it takes. That is the chemical properties of sulfur. But there's lots of little things that, Aaron, you talked about the retconning of the series. This one does that a lot. Like a lot of things you go, wait, did you guys even watch the last movie? Because that's not what happened. Or the invention of a new brother played by Cedric Hardwicke called Ludwig. I'm like, nobody talks about him, but suddenly, don't you think Ludwig would be like, "Excuse me, you're inheriting a big castle and things like that. Could I have some?" John, yes, I'll let you kick things off. What do you love about Ghost of Frankenstein?
Okay, so first of all, let me just throw out there that in my opinion of this film, 2 + 2 does equal 5. And I don't care how many times you kind of define it for me, it's going to equal 5. I have vivid memories of watching this on my 13-inch black and white TV when I was probably 11 or 12 or 13, and it just resonated with me. The ending blew my mind. You have Igor once again playing this great character. I've always been a fan of Lionel Atwill, even though I probably at the time had no clue who he was. But I loved another evil character. Not necessarily the mad scientist, but obviously a guy that's doing some shady shit. Chaney Jr. doesn't do much as the creature, but this is at a time where a lot of them weren't doing anything.
Right.
But I think it's the whole ending of how Igor ends up with the creature, in the creature, that's what resonates in my brain. And so I watch this now, and yeah, there are flaws. There's, like Aaron mentioned, isn't that Renfield? Wait a minute. Isn't that Hans? I mean, they're all over the place. But I love this. I just eat this movie up. And every time I watch it, I have that sense of nostalgic that it reminds me of being a kid watching one of these classic Universal movies.
I think if Lionel Atwill hadn't been so brilliant as Inspector Krogh, that I would have been happy to have him back. But it just feels like if you're going to stay in the same universe, to have Atwill again, you were just that guy. I just saw you in that other movie. I love him in this, but it just feels like if you're going to be making a sequel, to have that same actor playing a completely different character. Aaron, what are your thoughts on Ghost of Frankenstein?
I mean, this is a big line to me when we go from Son to Ghost, because suddenly we're in the like weird experimentation phase of the Frankenstein films, where every film they're like, let's pitch this at the wall and see what happens. And in this one, it's really, let's see what happens if we put another really big horror name in the monster role. They didn't have Karloff anymore. And I think his physicality is really interesting, because I feel like more than anything, it is the addition of Chaney that really does bring forward the sort of folklore of the monster, right? I mean, kids for years kind of walk around with Chaney's physicality when they're Chaney and Lugosi's physicality when they're mimicking the monster. And so I think it's important, and I think it's a really critical film. But I also think that Chaney just doesn't. It's amazing to me because he has so much pathos when he plays in The Wolfman, but it's like it does not come through here. He's so good in that other role, and here he just doesn't seem to carry it with him. He's just such a golem of a character. And unlike John, I always find the ending. In fact, I teach a horror class, and I think I stopped doing it this last time because John was offended whenever I told him I did this. But I would show the ending of the film so we could all kind of like, look at this crazy shit, because it really, I mean, it's bananas to hear the voice come out of the monster like that in that way. You're just like, wow, what an insane thing to choose to do. But it's kind of fun. It's a really fun movie, but I do think that this is where the movies become fun and lose some of their sort of philosophical edge.
I think in terms of if you were showing students and trying to talk about the evolution of these films, it would be showing the scene with Karloff meeting and discovering the little girl, and then show right next to that the Chaney interpretation of discovering the little girl, and how Karloff melts and he's amazed, and Chaney just stays the way, almost robotic, which I think a lot of that had probably with what he was getting from Erle C. Kenton, the director, because Chaney, one thing about him was he was such an emotional actor. He always wore his emotions on his sleeve, going back to Lenny, going back to and Larry Talbot, certainly. He was not afraid to show emotion and be gentle and let it show. I feel that Erle C. Kenton was probably holding him down a bit more and saying, give me more stoicism, give me more of a monster. Mentioning earlier the Sherlock Holmes films, this was a series that went from being A films to suddenly becoming B films. And this one, you see it in the budgets, you see it in terms of we're not going to go for emotional investigation, we're going to change it into a melodramatic pot boiler with a lot of great plot points, jerking you around. I'm with John. I love this film. I think it's great. And I admire the fact that they bothered to connect the pit that he falls into, even though, yes, why does it evolve? I like that they carried on with Igor. I miss that they didn't carry on with Inspector Krogh. He doesn't die. He just gets, the thing ripped out. Why didn't he show up again and they cast somebody else as that evil doctor? There was certainly by this point a large enough stock company of Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula actors to choose from. It would have been fascinating if they had given that role to Dwight Fry, give him something more to do, and then bring back Inspector Krogh. But that's why sometimes these films for me, when you're getting into this era, they become a little bit of a heartbreaker of going, God, with a little bit more effort or a little bit more money, you could have really kept making A-level films here. But I think, we talked about this we've talked about these series, Aaron, is that they just didn't have the mentality of thinking, oh, what did we do in the last film? Who played what roles in the last film or any of those types of things, which is just sort of a disappointment. They just weren't thinking about things like they think of multi-universes now. Yeah. So unfortunately, it's like watching old episodic television from the 70s where you're going, oh, none of this is what you did 3 episodes ago,
Yeah.
So I love it. I think it's great fun. And I really enjoyed watching what Chaney was trying, even though I felt that he was fighting a director, holding him down, trying to bring something to it. And I think it's a memorable performance.
Well, to your point, Michael, I think that's one of the things that, as someone who's a fan of the franchise, that it doesn't feel like the care is given, that it just feels like contrivance after contrivance where it's like, we loved Igor, so we got to bring Igor back. Well, we shot him. It doesn't matter. And they don't even bother to explain it. He just comes back. The 2 jurors that get killed in Son of Frankenstein, they pop up in the town council. I'm like, hang on a second. And the fact that we have a brother who just lives next door, who's been trying to hide that he's related to the Frankensteins, even though he's clearly a Frankenstein. You're like, what? It just feels kind of threadbare in that regard. Right. And it does feel like it's the 40s and we want to make another movie. We're already doing the Mummy movies. Let's get these Frankenstein movies rolling again. That's kind of how it feels to me.
Well, and if you look at Erle C. Kenton, he's doing Abbott and Costello films. He's doing Westerns. He's doing, it's just this grindhouse that Universal International, I'm not sure if it was international by then, but their transition after the Lemleys, that it was just about crank them out, get them fast, keep the series going. And that lack of care, it's frustrating more than anything. There was still a lot of good that they were squeezing out of this.
Well, they all have their different strengths. The first 3, each one is such a stellar production. These are 3 monumental, great, horror films. And while this is really enjoyable and really good, you do feel the downgrade, even with like Bela Lugosi's Igor makeup.
Yeah,
he doesn't have the things in this one like he did in Son of Frankenstein. And you can imagine, okay, the budget's lower. Jack Pierce doesn't have as much time. The amount of daytime scenes versus nighttime scenes. This new town, it feels very normal as compared to the town of Frankenstein and Son of Frankenstein, or the town and Bride of Frankenstein. However, there's still a lot of great things. I love how it's the continued adventures of Igor and the monster. I really enjoy that aspect because it sort of as a kid, this always kind of reminded me of the Island of Misfit Toys and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. It's these 2 kind of misfit characters, and like I said, Igor may not be the greatest friend, but he's the best in town.
He's much better in this one. He's a better, kinder version. You actually like Igor in this one.
When the monster, goes away and is up on the roof with the little girl, you could tell he's like, oh no, he's like, how do I get him out of this jam? About Lon Chaney Jr., I want to include this story of how he wasn't able to bring all the emotion into the character, and he loved kids. There's a bunch of kids in those scenes, and he bought them all ice cream. And that's sweet, and on Halloween nights he would howl at the moon for the neighborhood kids. He loved kids. It's kind of a shame he wasn't able to put as much as that. I also the ending I love too, when Bela Lugosi's when Igor's brain gets put in the monster's body, because I feel like no one could do world domination like Bela Lugosi. No one can say I am super strong. I am just gonna take over, and he believes it. The way he says it, no one can say I'm going to conquer the world like Bela Lugosi. and so hearing that voice out of this super strong body that has the strength of 100 men, it's like, my gosh, he's going to do some damage.
Anna.
So this is the only one of these movies I hadn't already seen several times before coming in today. So I saw this movie for the first time this weekend, and I'm feeling a little comforted by all this discussion about inattention to detail, because the number of times I had to rewind the film because I thought I missed something. So there's things that are maybe off that I can forgive. Like I like a jump in logic, for example. The start of this movie with the townspeople complaining and they're being told, do what you want. We're gonna blow up the castle. I can forgive that because I'm like, great, cool. Let's move the plot along immediately. But some of the details about the rivalry between the doctors and how, you know, the apprentice has become the master because some mistake that happened earlier. And I was rewinding, like, did I miss something? Some details I wasn't quite as in tune with. Sometimes I was rewinding just because Evelyn Anchors has such great gowns by Vera West again. And I just like to look at them. But there were a few times where I felt a little bit lost. And then other times where I was lost and it was totally fine. Like, seriously, your name is Frankenstein and you're making a big name for yourself in the medical community doing cutting edge brain transplant surgery, but you don't want anyone to know you're that Frankenstein? Sure, okay. Like, sure. That I'm fine with. I did like in this movie and also Son both have like a fake out with the monster with the child at a height. So first, we've of course got the most famous scene in the original Frankenstein we've talked about with Maria. And then, so you have the little fake out with the son in the pit for the Son of Frankenstein, and then here for Ghost. I did have a concern. Keep in mind, I just saw this movie this week, and I did have a concern when they said, okay, put her down now. I was so afraid the monster was just going to drop her and not understand the direction, but he's learned. He just brings her back down, but then he gets her ball later and sets a fire. And I'm like, oh, he hasn't learned everything, I guess. Yeah.
This was a time when horror films they weren't real films. Universal didn't, the Lemleys were out. Universal didn't give a crap about these films. They put less and less money. These were just hired hands to the directors and everybody. Unfortunately, some of the actors were really still trying to do their best with what they had. But I don't think if you compare this film and the people that were behind it and the reasons they were behind it compared to what in the 30s, and then you also throw in that the Hays Code was in full force. So instead of trying to deal with that, we're just going to make these kind of silly for kids because that's who watches these anyway. They're not for, real film goers. And as the series progresses from here, it's more and more evident that that's the direction that they're going.
Yeah, we're going to be tackling the future adventures of the Frankenstein monster when we talk about the Wolfman series later this year. But I had a great time. I think that's the one thing is I keep coming back to these movies. Like these first four are just a riot. I enjoy them so much on so many different levels. Let's circle back around for final thoughts about these four films and the first film and kind of the legacy of the Frankenstein monster as created by Universal Studios. Bobby, let's go and kick things off with you.
It's an incredible franchise. Each one brings something new and special to the table. And that first movie, it's just the rawness and the drama and the just pure emotional power of it. And then Bride of Frankenstein does something different. It makes it's bigger, it's grander, it's more theatrical. And then you have Son of Frankenstein, which kind of brings it back. The tone is sort of in the middle. It's like, it's not quite as raw as the first one, but it is more grounded. And you have these new characters. You'll be able to go see as Igor and Inspector Clo. And then even in this one, like you have the addition of Evelyn Anchors and everything. And so it's an incredible franchise.
Anna.
I mean, this podcast is called Horror 101, and what is more 101 than Frankenstein? It's a combination of like such a compelling, perverse, horrible story that we said at the top is timeless. There's always going to be things that make this a story we're interested in, but the entire package of the costuming, the performances, the visuals of like the set pieces and stuff for these films, that horror movies are never the same again after Frankenstein. And with each installment, horror films continue to change, whether it's about just creating sequels to begin with or showing different ways to tell horror stories and different imagery that becomes iconic, different characters like Igor, who doesn't even show up to the third one, that become iconic. This is just such incredibly influential horror IP, and 95 years later is still something very fun to talk about.
Awesome. Michael.
The thing that is so just remarkable about it is that there were performances and work being created by people at the absolute top of their game. It's still the gold standard. It went on and it spun out a bit out of focus a little bit and became cheapened and everything, but it'll never just take away from Karloff's performance, Jack Pierce's work, Elsa Lanchester's work. It's just fine artistry. And that's just what a pleasure. It's not even just in this franchise. It's like put up against any American film over the last 100 years. It's still right up there.
Aaron.
So I kind of trail along with what Anna said. I mean, as much as to say that these films have influence is to way undersell their importance. These 4 films, they live in the semiotics of our culture. They're not just influential for horror, they are influential across the board in all of Western culture, certainly in all of English-speaking culture, but even in European countries. There is no place you can go with this image of the Frankenstein monster and not have immediate recognition. As we talked about, the lines that come out of these films are immediately recognizable to people who have never seen any of these films. They have already outlived their cinematic importance and are embedded in the fabric of literally our entire folklore. And so to not have seen them, I think, is to do yourself a great disservice. And it surprises me how many people haven't managed to circle back around and take the 70 minutes or so it takes to watch all 4 of these films. I mean, I'm joking, but they're also quick films, and they're different from each other, and they matter. At the end of the day, they matter culturally, they matter historically, and they're just an outstanding fun thing to do, and you'll get a lot out of it if you haven't done it recently.
And John.
Obviously, everything everybody has said is completely true. The beauty of these films is that you can go back to these no matter how many times you've seen them, and you're probably going to discover something else. Maybe you saw Son of Frankenstein years ago, and you go back to now and you go, God damn, when did he move into this cool looking house? Because you didn't remember that when you saw it as a younger kid, maybe. Or the subtext in a lot of these films, irregardless of whether it was implied or not. If you're picking up on it, it's going to make you think. You're living in this world at a time when, at least in the first 3, that these films were important. They were trying to tell the audience something. They were meant to be serious films, and they pushed the envelopes on a lot of these. And every time I go back and revisit them, it's always a fun trip. You're always going to maybe see something that you didn't, or maybe even if it's just a performance. And whether it's the leads, the Karloff and them, you're going to start to see familiar faces, and you're going to start to enjoy it a lot more. And in a little bit of self-promotion, if you want to know more about Bride of Frankenstein, the new issue of Horror Hound has a retrospective that I wrote that's out on stands now. Highly recommend that, and I would highly recommend the whole series. Go through them all.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's we're actually having a wonderful dark and stormy night as we record this. So I'm glad everybody's internet hung in there long enough for us to finish the show. It's funny, I'm 150 episodes into this podcast, and it's only now that I'm coming around to this one. And I think it's because I was intimidated. I don't know, what we were going to say that was going to be revolutionary, but I don't think that's really the point. I think the point is to experience it and to share it with other people. Everybody has talked about the fact that I think a lot of the movies that we talk about on Horror 101 are movies that have been kind of taken for granted. We don't think about actually sitting down and watching them front to back. And I think there's really value in that. And these films in particular, I had such a great time sitting down with them this past week and taking that journey and watching how things change and watching things make me crazy. I'm like, wait, but that doesn't make any sense. That's part of the fun. And so I encourage everybody to go back and check out your Frankensteins that are sitting probably right within reach. And thank you all so much. What an incredible panel. Looking forward to having you all on again very soon. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.